Okay, now I know what I'm about to discuss is going to upset some people, but I just heard yesterday on CBC radio that at Dow they're doing AI research into how chickens communicate and the fact that they actually do communicate. And they can talk about how upset they are, and they talk to each other about things they like and they don't like, and about things that excite them. And I can't imagine they're any too crazy about how they're, raised, and then the fact that they're friends and then eventually them are getting their, they can't, that's got to be a bad thing. And the more we know about that, the more we understand their sentient feelings, the more we got to take that into consideration.
That voice you hear is humorist, actor, keynote speaker, and all-round good fella Bill Carr. And Bill and I used to talk about things like this quite frequently. Back when we worked together on a radio program called Shift for Brains. Say it fast, Shift for Brains. Now that was Bill's response, his post to a recent piece he'd heard on the radio. Now I received the same news release or pitch from Dalhousie University, and it was titled Fowl Language. Dalhousie researcher uses AI, or artificial intelligence, to crack the code of clucks and unravel chicken chatter secrets, opening the door to an improved quality of life. I don't know if you're like me, but when I first heard that, I actually thought it was some kind of April Fool's prank, given the timing and all. And I even said as much to the Dow communications person who sent out the email in the first place. She assured me this was real. And Bill's not wrong. This does crack open the door to some really deep thinking about this subject. Here was the rest of what Bill had posted. And
the implications are huge. I mean, we're going to find out that cows probably aren't crazy about what's going on in their lives, and lambs, and I bring that up at Easter, they can't be crazy about what's going on in veal cows. Let's not even talk about that. My point is, if we find out for sure that sentient beings are not happy, we at least owe them the opportunity to discuss their fate. It's the least we can do. And it's why I'm all the more committed to vegetarianism, because I know that if eventually the chickens get together and really, talk about it, they're going to tell us, Colonel Sanders is not a nice man, just for example. I know it's going to upset you, but facts are facts.
Now, just to be clear, that work was being done at Dalhousie's agricultural campus in Bible Hill, and it was being done by the research chair in Digital Livestock Farming. And as the release noted, it's like having a universal translator for chicken speech that could detect stress early and lead to more empathetic treatment of farm animals. But it's still about farming. And again, really deep thinking on this one. I'm Sheldon McLeod. This is my podcast, presented exclusively by SaltWire. This is Thinking Out Loud.
Suresh Neethirajan. I'm an associate professor and university research chair in Digital Livestock Farming at Dalhousie University, Canada.
So let's talk a little bit about your research and use of artificial intelligence. First of all, tell me a little bit about where this project came from, how this was a subject that you wanted to take on.
We've been working with farm animals such as horses, dairy cows, swine, pigs, and chickens for almost 10 years. I recently moved from Wageningen University and research in Netherlands to here in Halifax, Dalhousie University. We've been looking at how do we improve the quality of life of farm animals? How do we develop new solutions for tackling climate change? Improve welfare for farm animals via artificial intelligence and modern technologies. So basically, I'm from a farming community as well. So there is a personal affinity to develop solutions for farm animals. So these are the driving factors behind this particular project.
And chickens in particular, why was this particular method used to try and understand how chickens were communicating or what it was that they were saying?
So right now, when we walk into a poultry house or a poultry husbandry, we can hear lots of sounds, cacophony of nonsensical languages, different kinds of sound. Sound is basically an energy. We as human beings often, tend to misinterpret what other people say. But once we start paying attention, enough energy is being given to the attention, then we can actually understood what is that they are trying to communicate and how we can respond. So the question here is, how do we go about using the technology to better understand the communication of these birds? So artificial intelligence and natural language processing help us to look at things that are easily visible, easily understandable. They help us to unravel, dig deeper, find meaning behind very subtle signs and signatures from these sounds and vocalizations the birds make.
How do you carry out this research? What are you doing to try and unravel that mysterious communication between another species?
Yeah. So the way we did was we collected a lot of data over past year and a half. Here in Truro campus at Nova Scotia, we have a Atlantic Poultry Research Institute where we did a series of experiments in collecting audio as well as visual data. So some of the birds, we also collected data from Asia as well as Europe and in United States via our collaborators and from industries. So the sound, for example, there are many different contexts the sound is coming from. Some birds, when they are sick, when they are affected by avian influenza or even a low pathogenic influenza, they peculiarly express certain tonality. When birds are happy, when you introduce a certain playful material, we call them as enrichment material. It could be a bale of straw. It could be just a stick, like a perch for the birds to sit after they feed. So they suddenly changes their emotional context, their energy, amplitude, tone, pitch behind the vocalization changes. If we can pay attention to changes in the frequency and the interval of the feeding, the hygiene protocols, there is a change in the vocalizations. So we did a variety of experiments. For example, we were stressing the birds by suddenly opening an umbrella as a visual stressor. We played a loud dog barking sound and wolf sound, like a wild animal, using speakers inside the poultry barn. Some birds were actually going through certain unhealthy, stressful situations. So we recorded all of those sounds. Then we converted these variety of sounds into some of them into images. So, and then once we get the images, we were looking at the buried signatures behind each and every pixels inside those images. For example, healthy versus unhealthy, a bird that is happy versus a bit delayed feed, frustrated bird vocalization call. So some data were converted to images. Some data, what we did was we converted them into semantics, which means it's not directly the human language, the words we speak, but we use different models, hidden Markov model, and other models using artificial intelligence and deep learning via natural language processing, and converted into specific words. These words are basically a representation of the combination of amplitude, energy of the vocalization, the sound that comes from these chickens based on different contexts. And then we did a what we call as topic modeling, how each of those, in the context of the chicken bird vocalization, we were looking at identifying patterns and clusters of sounds, how each of these sounds relate to specific behavior or specific context. For example, a unique word that basically represents either is a feeding call or a mating call or an alerting to predators. So those are the type of calls we were looking at based on the words expressed in the form of vocalization by these chickens. So again, this doesn't mean we are translating sounds of these birds directly into human language, but we are categorizing these words according to their meanings and intentions behind the emotions based on the ethology. For example, whether it's an alarm call or a food call, etc. The next step, what we did was we did a sentimental analysis and emotion investigation. This is very commonly done. For example, if you walk into a big, huge supermarket in the United States, we human beings, we are being recorded all the time. Our, video as well as audio. So the choice of words we speak among our own maybe family member, and then when we interact with the sales agent or the cashier at the supermarket, they also look for what are the type of words we choose, and they can quickly, using natural language processing, map the emotions of our brain in that particular moment and say, okay, this person is going to buy this product or will close the sale of the purchase of car, etc. They can make the judgment right away. So there is a lot of research happening. So the inspiration comes from that as well. How do we use the human-based sentimental analysis and emotion investigation for animals? Here we were relying on acoustic features of the chicken bird vocalizations, and we use artificial intelligence to infer the emotional states and the well-being of these animals. For example, stress calls, they have different acoustic signatures compared to the acoustic signatures collected from data in when the birds are in comfort or contentment. So that's the way we did analysis, and then we come up with the different classes of emotions and different words they actually utter in terms of the birds speaking among themselves, and also express their frustration, disappointment, contentment through words in the form of differences in vocalization signatures.
Terribly fascinating. And I have to ask, we're not trying to put a human context to the communication between these animals, clearly, but what are the implications for farming? Anyone who's tended animals or perhaps has a pet knows that their animal is communicating to them. They don't often know exactly what it is they're saying. They can guess. Are we talking about an educated guess here? What is the end game? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish here?
So we now know that chickens have emotions. Chickens also have their own special way of talking with certain sounds like clucks, squawks, purrs, and other sounds over and over, kind of like their own words and sentences that mean something really important to them. For example, when we analyze our data, we noticed some words were popping up quite frequently. For example, irrespective of whether the bird is healthy or neutral or sick, the words such as going was coming on frequently all over the place. We also found a certain word called knee-high, N-I-H-A-I. This may sound nonsensical actually when from a human perspective, but from the bird perspective, based on the context and the environmental conditions they go through, they really provide very in-depth meaning to the conditions of the birds they experience. So it's a bit of a head scratcher. What is it? What does it mean, knee-high? There are also words like room, I'm going to next room, back, other, side. So these are some of the words that are popping up based on the vocalizations when we use the semantic modeling to convert the vocalization into specific words. So they really have a pretty consistent way of talking to each other, no matter what's happening around them. They also share their way of speaking highlights. So this clearly shows how clever these birds are in terms of communicating and getting along. So it's just that we are at the verge of translating these sounds into some really meaning. For example, how do we develop intervention strategies? How do we develop animal welfare protocols if there is a 0.5 degrees Celsius change in the animal husbandry system? Are they feeling happy? Can we be able to decode and understand the real needs of these birds? Right now in farming animal management, we have dairy cows, swine or pigs, horses, and these birds. So we classify them into two groups: bigger animals, smaller animals. So it's individual animal management versus flock level or group level management. Right now, most of the time, especially for turkey, broilers, and chicken industry, It's always a group level management interventions are being done. So we are proposing, hey, can we be able to shift from group level to individual level or a subgroup level management of these farm animals, such as birds? So an example is if an LED light is being placed in the poultry barn, the same level of wavelength, intensity, and energy of these light may not be comfortable for all the birds. There may be a group of birds, they try to move around, migrate to a different zone where they feel less intensity. So we propose, instead of giving a universal level of intervention strategies, give a zonal level, group level of intervention strategies. So we make the happy much more in a positive emotional state. Another example I could give is if there is a difference in the hygiene protocol, how often they clean the poultry barn, removal of litters and other materials. Can we be able to increase the frequency slightly? Because it directly is proportional to the composition of the gas levels in the micro odor composition. So that also improves the betterment and the quality of life of these birds. So tiny little changes in the life of these birds are directly proportional to the better well-being of the birds, and is also related to resource use utilization as well as climate change in the long run. So if we are able to save even 1% of water use or even 1% of the feeding and the resource uses in the on-farm daily operations, that is directly proportional to cutting down the emissions in terms of methane and other gases we produce during these farming. So there are a lot of benefits in terms of enhancing profitability, sustainability, as well as animal welfare in the poultry industry.
Is this the first of this type of research that you're aware of?
In the poultry sector, yes, we may be the first group to look at. People have looked at the audio before, but in terms of decoding, specifically looking at the words, language, and communication, we may be the first to actually find out the real meaning and finding decoding the language behind the chicken communications.
To go back to turning that audio into an image, are we talking like a wave file that people might be accustomed to seeing, or is this some other type of image that's being created?
So we call this a spectrogram. When we look at it, it has an X and Y axis. It has a different distribution and gradient level of RGB values. So when we look at it, it looks like an abstract painting from, like what we see here behind my screen. So Van Gogh, something similar. But when we look at each and every pixel point, X, Y, then it has specific meaning behind it. It has certain stress level buried in it. So artificial neural network and deep learning helps to pick up those and then do a very detailed, insightful trend and pattern analysis to find out what exactly these birds are trying to tell us.
And I know this is somewhat speculative, but do you envision a time, Professor, in the future in which people will know what their dog is saying to them or their cat?
Yes, there are a few companies who are already interested in looking at this in the United States. So we call them as a animal bioacoustics research. How do we decode? There has been some research done in whales, sperm whales and dolphins, etc. In terms of, we actually can make those sounds in the way the dolphins can understand and listen, and then they talk back. So it has been demonstrated. So there is a lot of potential to actually decode. Perhaps in near future, we may have a gadget that will record our voice and convert and try to communicate with these birds.
That sounds like the stuff of science fiction, but as you say, you're on that path, and it's due in part because of artificial intelligence. That's fair?
Yes.
Wow. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that perhaps is germane to this conversation?
I'm open for any questions if you have, in terms of if there's nothing, if any clarifications or additional details are needed, more than happy to share them.
And this is being carried out at the Dalhousie campus in Truro, or Bible Hill, as you say?
Yes.
And its implication, or at the very heart of it, it's about farming and raising or growing chickens and understanding what their needs may be. That's fair to say?
Yes, and also how do we provide sustainable profitability for the poultry industry? It's like a two sides of the same coin or double-edged sword. Sometimes when we think of welfare, it may mean that we are bringing down exerting additional pressure, bringing down the profitability. But it is not necessarily the case. We use the technology so that we increase the profitability and sustain the profitability for the producers, at the same time improve the welfare of the birds.
What are the ethical implications of, in some ways, giving rise to a notion that these are cogent beings who communicate with one another, and the appropriateness of humans to have them in captivity and to use them in that way?
There may be concerns related to, for example, when the technology is being developed, if a company is trying to sell the technology to the farmers, first of all, the question we could ask is, does the farm animals have privacy? Do they have privacy? For example, if you put a camera and constantly monitor them, sometimes maybe they like to shy away, they like their own quiet zone, they don't like to be monitored. But how do we know that we are crossing the boundary in terms of violating their actual real needs? So a bit of an ethological question we can ask. The second question is data privacy. Who owns the actual data of these vocalizations? Is it the farmers? Is it the company that sells the technology to the farmers? So how do we create a shared mutual benefit? Because in terms of creating value for all the stakeholders here. In terms of watchdog agencies, Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, they are more about how do we avoid spilling of diseases from the farm animals to the humans, getting rid of zoonotic diseases possibility. So can we be able to predict the diseases based on these disturbances, anomalies, and the smaller nuances from these vocalization sound calls? Is there a possibility? Is there a possibility for real-time transmission of the vocalization of data from the farm to the veterinarians who may not be able to access the farm in real time? So these are some of the questions we need to look at when we develop the technology and bring multiple stakeholders in realization of this potential.
How do you know that your data is accurate? How do you know that you're interpreting it properly? How do you know that this is really what you're observing?
So we do a variety of behavioral tests, variety of biochemical tests. For example, we collect the feathers of the birds, blend of the chickens at specific time litters, and then do biochemical analysis to look at lactate and other stress-related indicators. So that's a validation study. We also work with ethologists and behavioral scientists, provide them video. It's not just sound alone. We put thermal camera as well as two-dimensional high-resolution camera. For example, the blink of the eye of the chicken can provide a lot of telltale signs. Unlike human beings, they have vertical eyelids. There are 3 eyelids for chickens. So we call them as nictitating membrane. They close and open like a shutter door. So we also look at how the heat emanates and the thermoregulation happens using thermal camera. We capture the beak is made of keratin, which is a proteinaceous membrane. It has 2 small holes through which the inhalation exhalation happens. There is a lot of heat transmission happens. So surrounding the face region, there is also a comb on the surface of the head. So the variation in the heat at a specific time point or particular regions of the facial, we also have that data in addition to the behavioral data. Then sometimes we do behavioral tests such as a small little plastic ball in which inside we put larvae, which is alive. So the birds make an extra effort to pick through the holes of the plastic ball to take the larvae, which is a simulation of the mental activity So they feel the emotions shift directly to positive. If they are in negative or neutral, they become excited and then they slowly shift. So this combination of behavioral tests, multimodal data, biochemical analysis, and ethological information help us to say, hey, yes, what we are looking at is scientifically validated. We are continuously working with neuroscientists and ethologists to create more consensus. For example, when I utter the word emotion, it basically starts with the letter E. Emotion, which means energy in motion. But Paul Ekman and Darwin, they were the earliest scientists who actually decoded and understood and created different classes of emotions for human beings. But for farm animals, we are not yet there in terms of having, okay, this is exactly frustration, this is exactly disappointment, anger, sadness, and happy. So we are still continuously working with our European partners and some in United States to come up with the consensus of what exactly constitutes an emotion for farm animals. How do we create a baseline, and so on and so forth. So it's a work in progress in terms of creating a scientifically valid principle for this.
And you touched on emotions rather than intelligence, and that is a distinction that you are very clear on.
We could also call emotional intelligence EI. For example, yes, the birds also have sympathy. If you drive in a rural area, especially the backyard coops, you might have seen if there is an eagle flying down, sometimes the mother hen makes a peculiar loud sound and the smaller chicks immediately gather around, and then the mother hen spreads her wings and then try to protect. So we can see the sympathy and the protection and the motherly, what we call as a imprinting process, social imprinting process for the chicks very clearly. So they do have emotions. For bigger farm animals such as pigs, they demonstrate certain empathy. It has been clearly scientifically, validated and evidence for dairy cows also. They are much more highly emotionally evolved along with intelligence. For example, they have the ability to, when an animal caretaker who walks into the poultry barn or a specific dairy barn, they can distinguish, okay, this person is more friendly, this person is not more friendly. So they have the ability to turn away their face or welcome in their own way the caretaker that walks into the barn. So there are certain, not only anecdotal, but scientifically validated evidences. Some farm animals, they have the ability to check out themselves in the mirror. They just check out their body. Oh, okay, this is me. So they have the ability to recognize themselves in the mirror. We call them as mirror tests in the behavioral science for farm animals. Yes. So, but in the chickens, it's not much fully experimented or studied yet. So we are still looking at how do these are for larger animals. In small animals, we do know that they have emotions, but in terms of intelligence, for example, as soon as the egg hatches, because the industrial production animals such as chickens, broilers, as soon as the egg hatch, they come out, they never have the opportunity to see or interact with their mother. So there is no opportunity for social imprinting at all. So they have to learn everything on their own by pecking. Oh, this is food, this is not food. So the intelligence comes in that itself. It's a very basic evolutionary intelligence. But when we look deeper using these artificial intelligence, we now have the possibility to look at the different classes and grades and colors and levels of intelligence, and we can actually group them and classify them in birds such as chickens.
Very fascinating research. And Professor, I thank you very much for sharing and talking about that with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheldon.